The morning air was crisp, filled with the kind of stillness that only came right before a storm, whether from the sky or from people. At the airport drop-off lane, cars pulled in and out like clockwork. Families said goodbye, lovers hugged tightly, and lone travelers stared into the glass doors with quiet resolve. Among them was 17-year-old Jamal, standing with his carry-on bag slung over one shoulder and a folded boarding pass gripped in his palm. He looked around the terminal with a mix of excitement and nerves. This wasn't just any trip, it was his first solo flight. A reward for earning top marks in his senior year. His mother had booked the ticket herself, beaming with pride. She was supposed to meet him later at the destination, but for now, this part was all his. He smoothed the front of his hoodie, the one with the logo of the university he dreamed of attending, and took a deep breath before stepping toward the check-in counter. That's when he noticed the pilot. A tall white man in his late 50s uniform, crisp in expression, unreadable, standing a few feet away near a coffee kiosk. Their eyes met only for a second, but something in the man's gaze lingered. It wasn't just curiosity. It was suspicion, wrapped in a smirk, a stare that asked a question. Jamal hadn't invited. He turned away, shaking it off. Maybe he was imagining it, maybe it was nothing. But then came the voice, low, sharp, and clearly aimed at him. "Hey you, what are you doing over here?" Jamal blinked. "Confused, I'm checking in. I've got a flight." The pilot stepped closer. "Let me see your ticket." Jamal hesitated. "Why you don't look like you belong in this section," the man said. "This area is for first class." Jamal's heart skipped. "That's the ticket my mom booked," he replied, trying to stay calm. "She always says to fly smart, not scared," but the pilot wasn't listening. He reached for his phone and muttered something about protocol and security concerns. Passengers around them began to take notice. A few glanced up from their phones, others paused mid-conversation. Jamal's cheeks burned as he realized what was happening. He was being profiled, judged, called out for nothing more than his presence and the color of his skin. A security officer approached. Jamal's mouth felt dry, but he handed over his ID and ticket without hesitation. The officer looked it over, glanced at Jamal, then back at the pilot. He said slowly, "Everything checks out. The young man is cleared for first class." The pilot's jaw tightened. "Are you sure?" "Yes, sir." 100%. The officer gave Jamal a nod of quiet apology and moved on, but the damage had already been done. Jamal stood in the center of the terminal, a spotlight on him. He never asked for a moment of humiliation etched into his memory. And yet through it all, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't lash out. He simply lifted his chin, met the pilot's eyes one last time, and walked away toward the gate. Because sometimes dignity is louder than rage, and sometimes silence speaks volumes. If you've ever been in Jamal's shoes or know someone who has shared this story, let it be a reminder that judgment based on appearances still exists and that calling it out matters. Stand up, speak out, and help build a world where young men like Jamal are seen for who they truly are. Determined, dignified, and destined for greatness. The walk toward the gate felt longer than it should have. Jamal's steps were steady, but his mind raced, trying to suppress the embarrassment curling in his chest like smoke. He had done nothing wrong, and yet everyone had stared at him like he was a threat, not a passenger. He found an empty seat in the corner near the pilot lounge. He just wanted a moment to reset, to breathe, to collect himself before boarding. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a laminated badge. Shadow Flight Intern, Federal Youth Aviation Program. It was more than just a title. It was his pride. He had been accepted into the highly selective mentorship track for teens interested in aviation careers. A dream he had nursed since he was 9, when he first watched his mom lift off in her captain's uniform and disappear into the clouds. As part of the program, Jamal was scheduled to observe part of the cockpit protocols today under the guidance of the flight crew. His name had been cleared, logged into the system, and verified by the airline itself. He wore that badge with honor, until it was snatched from his hand. "You've got some nerve," the pilot from earlier hissed suddenly, standing in front of him again. "Where did you get this?" Jamal blinked. "What?" "This fake badge. Did you make this at home, print it in your bedroom?" "It's real," Jamal said, standing slowly. "I'm part of the FAA youth program. It's all logged in the system. You can check." "Oh, I will check," the man snapped. "Right after I call security back, pretending to be part of a flight crew. That's a federal offense." Jamal's heart pounded. "Sir, I'm not pretending. My name is Jamal Carter. You can verify it with the supervisor. My mom signed all the waivers herself." I'm the pilot held up the badge like it was evidence in a trial. You don't belong back here. You're not one of us. That sentence hit harder than any raised voice ever could. Jamal stood frozen, not in fear, but in disbelief. He had earned his place, he had followed every rule, and still he was being reduced to a trespasser, in a space he was invited to. Passengers nearby were watching again, not stepping in, just watching. Jamal swallowed the lump in his throat. I'm just trying to learn, he whispered. The pilot scoffed. Then learn this: actions have consequences. He turned to make another call, muttering into his phone about detaining a suspicious youth impersonating flight staff. And that's when Jamal did the only thing he could. He reached for his phone and called his mother. The ring felt endless when she finally picked up. Her voice was warm, unaware of the storm on the other end. Hey baby, how's it going? His voice cracked just slightly. Mom, I need you to come. He ended the call before she could ask another question. Jamal's hands trembled as he lowered the phone. He didn't want to cry, not here, not in front of them, but everything around him suddenly felt 10 times louder. The buzz of overhead announcements, the dragging of suitcase wheels across tile, the muted gasps from bystanders pretending not to stare. He felt exposed. Like he wasn't just being watched, he was being judged. The pilot paced a few feet away, still holding Jamal's badge like it was counterfeit cash. A security guard hovered nearby, not stepping in yet, just observing, like waiting for a signal. A woman with a coffee cup whispered something to the man beside her. A flight attendant walked by, glanced once at Jamal, then looked away. Another passenger raised their phone discreetly, maybe recording, maybe not, but the implication was enough. Jamal shifted his weight from one foot to the other, but the floor beneath him felt like ice. He wasn't being detained, he wasn't being touched, but he was being isolated, as if the air around him had shrunk into a spotlight he never asked for. He glanced down at his shoes, scuffed slightly from the walk-in. They looked small, like his confidence now. He thought of his mom, how proud she had been when he got accepted into the aviation shadow program. He thought of how she always told him, when they question who you are, stay grounded. They can't take that from you. But what if they already had? What if one man in a uniform, with the wrong assumption and the right authority, could erase everything Jamal had worked for? His throat tightened. He wanted to speak, to defend himself, but what was the point? Every time he opened his mouth, the pilot interrupted. Every time he tried to explain, someone looked at him like he was lying. He wasn't just being treated like an imposter. He was being treated like a threat, the kind that didn't belong in luxury waiting areas or youth mentorships, the kind that made people clutch their purses, the kind that made a pilot forget that mentorship was the point of the program in the first place. Jamal took a slow, shaky breath. He didn't yell, he didn't run, he just stood there waiting for his mother. Waiting for the only person who ever looked at him like the sky wasn't just a dream, but a destination. The minutes crawled. Jamal stood alone, clutching his phone like it was the only anchor he had left. He tried to call his mother again, but it went straight to voicemail. She was likely already en route, knowing her she'd waste no time. But every second without her felt like a lifetime. Captain Whitman, the pilot, was now speaking to a different supervisor over the phone. His voice was sharp, clipped, deliberate. Yes, I have the badge. No, he doesn't match the profile. I don't care what's on record. It looks forged. I'm not letting this slide until I speak with senior command. He didn't even look at Jamal anymore. Just talked about him like he wasn't even there. Jamal finally mustered the courage to speak. His voice, though quiet, carried a strength that didn't come from volume, but from truth. I told you I'm part of the FAA mentorship program. My mother signed the release forms herself. Her name is Captain Maya Carter. The pilot stopped mid-sentence. He turned slowly. Captain Carter, Jamal nodded. She's my mom. Whitman scoffed. You expect me to believe that Jamal held his ground? She's flown more hours than most of the people in this terminal combined, he said. You can look her up. She's one of the senior commanders on this airline. Whitman smirked coldly. Oh, I would. And when I do, if it turns out you used her name to pull some stunt, there won't just be consequences for you. I'll make sure she faces disciplinary action too. Jamal's breath caught. He stared at the man who had now crossed every line. It wasn't enough to humiliate him. Now he was threatening the one person who had built her career with dignity and resilience just because she raised him. You don't have that kind of power, Jamal said, voice low but unshaken. Whitman leaned in. Son, in this industry, people like me write the rules. People like you get removed before they can break them. The words hit like a slap, but Jamal didn't flinch. Instead, he whispered more to himself than anyone else. You have no idea who you're talking about. The tension in the air was so thick, it felt like even the walls were holding their breath. Jamal stood his ground, but his fingers curled tighter around the strap of his bag. Every part of him wanted to scream, but he didn't. He didn't have to, because at that moment, the doors to the terminal slid open with a quiet hiss, and in walked Captain Maya Carter. She wasn't in uniform. She didn't need it. Power moved with her like a shadow, her posture straight, her steps measured, her expression calm, but with the kind of calm that made grown men nervous. She was flanked by two members of the airline's executive team, both dressed in tailored suits. Their pace was quick, urgent, but hers unhurried. Because when you own the room, you never need to rush. Passengers stopped mid-sentence, staff members froze. A TSA agent stood straighter. Someone gasped. Captain Whitman turned mid-call and immediately lost color from his face. Maya's eyes locked on Jamal. She didn't say a word. She just walked to him, wrapped her arms around her son, and held him like he was the only person in the building that mattered. And for her, he was. Jamal melted into the embrace, his shoulders finally dropping. For the first time that morning, he could breathe. Then she let go. Turned faced Whitman. Everything in the terminal quieted. The hum of rolling suitcases, the ding of flight announcements, even the murmurs from nearby passengers gone. Because when Maya Carter looked someone in the eye, the room obeyed. Whitman cleared his throat. Captain Carter, I wasn't aware. Maya raised a hand and he stopped mid-sentence. That hand wasn't loud, but it had shut down rooms far more powerful than this one. She tilted her head. You weren't aware that a young black passenger with a first-class ticket, a verified FAA mentorship badge, and a clean record deserved not to be interrogated in front of strangers. He opened his mouth again. She didn't blink. You weren't aware that my son, whose name is in your system, was being publicly accused of fraud, harassed, threatened. Whitman stammered, I was just following procedure. There was no disrespect intended. Ma'am, Maya stepped closer, voice still low. Disrespect isn't about intent, it's about impact. And with those words, the room exhaled all at once, but it was clear this wasn't over. It was only beginning. Maya didn't move fast. She didn't need to. Each step forward was measured less, like confrontation, more like a verdict being carried out. Captain Whitman stood straighter, instinctively trying to regain the dominance he'd once wielded just minutes earlier. But his words were gone, and in their place, silence and sweat. Maya stopped just close enough to make him uncomfortable, but not close enough to seem aggressive. She looked at him, not just through him, but into him. Then she said with surgical precision, Tell me, Captain Whitman, what exactly did my son do to warrant your suspicion? Whitman licked his lips. He was in the pilot lounge. That area is restricted. Maya's brow arched slightly. Did you ask to see his ID? I asked for his credentials and he handed me a badge I didn't recognize. A badge issued directly by the FAA, she replied. You held it in your hand. You could have verified it with one call. Instead, you made several to escalate, not to clarify. He swallowed hard. You didn't ask questions, she continued. You made assumptions. Whitman glanced around as if searching for support. There was none. Your son dropped a name, yours. I didn't know he was telling the truth. Maya's eyes sharpened. You didn't know, so you decided to shame first and verify later. That's not protocol. That's profiling. Silence fell like snow. One of the executives behind her took a step forward, holding a tablet. Captain Carter, he said quietly, we've already pulled security footage and reviewed gate logs. Everything, Jamal said, checks out. He was in the proper area, scheduled for the shadow program, and listed under our internal system as cleared for cockpit access upon your discretion. Maya didn't take her eyes off Whitman. Then gently she nodded one. You saw a black teenager in first class and decided it was a mistake. You saw him wearing purpose and mistook it for a threat. Whitman stammered, I didn't mean any harm. But you caused it, Maya said, and your lack of intent doesn't erase my son's experience. She took one step closer, not threatening but grounding. Do you know what happens to young black men who are humiliated in public by men in uniforms? Most of the time they carry it forever. The difference here is that my son called me. Her voice lowered, not to soften but to land deeper. And you had no idea who was picking up the phone. Whitman's jaw clenched, but the defiance in his eyes was fading. It was being replaced by something far more familiar. Fear not of Maya, but of what was coming next. Maya turned slightly to the executive behind her. Borrow it. The man didn't hesitate. He tapped the tablet screen, and within seconds a portable monitor wheeled in by a staffer came to life. On it, security footage from just 30 minutes ago. Clear, unedited, time-stamped. The entire lobby watched as the screen flickered to life. There was Jamal standing near the pilot lounge checking his phone. Then came Whitman stepping into frame, confronting him without pause. There was no cause, no request, just an accusation. The room watched as Jamal tried to explain. The footage showed him pulling out his badge, calmly pointing toward his credentials. They saw the moment Whitman yanked it from his hand. They heard his voice amplified through audio playback. "You don't belong here." A soft gasp rippled through the crowd. Another clip loaded immediately after, Whitman on the phone saying, "I don't care what the system says, it looks forged." The audio was sharp, clear. Cold, Whitman's face turned pale. Maya didn't look away from him once. "Let me ask again," she said softly. "Was that procedure?" He said nothing. "Was that how you treat every student intern? Still nothing. Or just the black ones?" Whitman opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The screen paused on a single frame, Jamal standing alone clutching his phone while Whitman turned away with the badge in his hand. It was a still image, but it said everything. The executive next to Maya cleared his throat. "We've received reports of similar incidents unverified before today," he said, "but this footage confirms them. There will be an internal review. Effective immediately, Captain Whitman is suspended pending investigation." The terminal didn't cheer. It didn't need to. Justice in that moment was not loud. It was silent, exact, and undeniable. Captain Whitman didn't protest. Not because he agreed, but because he understood it was over. The uniform he had used like armor now felt like a target on his chest. The authority he had once worn like a crown had crumbled under the weight of truth. He stood motionless as the executive handed him the official suspension notice. Signed and stamped, effective immediately. Maya didn't smile. This wasn't a victory lap. It was a line drawn in permanent ink. He reached for words, some half-baked defense or excuse, but she cut him off with a look so steady, so precise, it made him forget how to speak. "I'm not here for your apology," Maya said, her voice calm as glass. "I'm here to ensure the next black teenager who walks into this airport isn't treated like a threat for daring to dream." Whitman's shoulders sagged. Maya turned to the watching crowd, employees, passengers, officers, all of them now painfully aware they'd witnessed something deeper than a personal offense. They'd seen a pattern play out in real time, and this time the pattern had consequences. "This isn't just about Jamal," she continued. "This is about every kid who's ever been told they're in the wrong place, when in fact they were the future of the space." She took a breath, not to pause, but to let the silence settle. "I don't want a system that reacts when someone important gets hurt. I want a system that's terrified of letting harm happen in the first place." And with that, she turned back to Jamal, still quiet, still processing, but now standing taller, because dignity once restored shines even brighter through the bruises. Maya reached for his hand, and together they walked away. Not out of retreat, but because their presence had already rewritten the rules. The chaos faded behind them. Maya and Jamal walked side by side down a quieter corridor of the airport, far from the murmurs, the stares, and the weight of what had just unfolded. For a long stretch, they didn't say anything. Not because there wasn't anything to say, but because some silences are sacred. Jamal's fingers stayed wrapped around hers. Even at 17, even as tall as he was now, there was still something grounding about that grip, like it reminded him where he came from and who was always in his corner. Maya led him to a small, tucked-away lounge used only by senior staff. No cameras, no questions, just space. She gestured for him to sit. He did slowly, then she crouched down in front of him. Not as a CEO, not as a captain, but as his mother. She placed a hand gently on his knee. "You okay?" she asked. Jamal looked down at his shoes. They still felt too small. I don't know." His voice cracked on the last word. Maya waited. Jamal finally looked up. "I did everything right, Mom. I followed every step. I smiled. I stayed calm. I explained myself, and it didn't matter." Maya nodded, her eyes soft but steady. "I know I didn't want to call you," he admitted. "I wanted to handle it like you always taught me," she smiled sadly. "And you did. I didn't handle it. I froze, no baby," she said. "You didn't freeze. You stood still." That's different. Freezing is fear, standing still, that's restraint. He blinked at her. You gave them no excuse to twist your story, she said. You didn't meet hate with hate. You gave truth room to speak for itself. Jamal's shoulders lowered. Just a little, but he tried to make me feel like I didn't belong. He whispered. Maya reached up and gently tapped his chest. You've belonged since the day you were born, she said. They don't get to vote on that, then quieter. You're not a threat, Jamal. You're a standard they didn't expect. Jamal breathed in slow. And for the first time since that morning, his heartbeat didn't feel like it was running from something. It felt like it was running towards something. A soft knock on the lounge door broke the moment. It opened slowly, revealing a tall black man in a flight captain's uniform. His stripes gleamed, but it was the warmth in his eyes that caught Jamal's attention. He smiled. Captain Carter, he said with a respectful nod toward Maya. Then looking at Jamal, he added, Mind if I borrow your son for a few minutes? Maya smiled back, then turned to Jamal. Go, she whispered. This is yours, Jamal. Rose slowly, unsure what to expect. The man introduced himself. Captain Johnson. I heard what happened. I watched the footage, and I saw how you handled yourself. Jamal didn't know how to respond. I've got a pre-flight check starting in 10 minutes, Captain Johnson continued, and I'd be honored if you'd sit in the jump seat beside me during pre-boarding. As a guest, and as someone who clearly belongs in that cockpit. Jamal blinked. You're serious? Dead serious, the man said with a grin. Shadow program intern. Right? Seems like you've already passed your first test. They walked together down the corridor. The path quieter now. Not because the airport had changed, but because Jamal had. With every step toward the aircraft, the fear faded, the weight lifted, the questions stopped echoing. At the foot of the jet bridge, a younger flight attendant stepped aside, glancing at Jamal with curiosity. Captain Johnson motioned ahead. Welcome aboard. Inside the cockpit, the world looked different. Not just because of the dials, the buttons, the view, but because Jamal was finally where he had always seen himself. He settled into the jump seat, adjusted the headset, and looked around like a child walking into a cathedral. Captain Johnson handed him a laminated checklist. Pre-start procedures. You read, I'll guide Jamal's fingers. Brush the paper steady now. Confident, this was it. Not just a moment of redemption, but a reclamation. Because some dreams get delayed. But the sky always remembers those who keep looking up. It had been exactly 31 days since that morning in the terminal. The headlines had cooled. The footage had stopped circulating, but the ripple effects still growing. Inside a newly renovated press hall at the airline's headquarters, media crews adjusted their lenses. Reporters scribbled last-minute questions. Behind the podium stood a massive display board emblazoned with bold white letters. New Horizon Futures Initiative for those who were told they don't belong. At precisely 10 a.m. Maya Carter stepped onto the stage, not just as a captain, not just as a CEO, but as the founder of something that didn't exist a month ago, something that needed to. She greeted the crowd briefly, then wasted no time. This isn't a rebranding, she began. This is a reckoning. An answer to the question, who gets to fly? And more importantly, who gets to dream? Behind her, the screen shifted. Photos appeared young men and women in training jumpsuits, hands on simulator controls, standing on airfield tarmacs with wide eyes and high hopes. Among them, front and center, was Jamal, dressed in a crisp blazer, now 18, and officially accepted into the airline's training mentorship track. He stood with his arms crossed, in a slight smile, not forced, not posed, but earned. Maya continued. New Horizon Futures will identify, sponsor, and train underserved youth across the country in aviation pathways, piloting, engineering, dispatch, and leadership. This isn't charity. It's correction. It's building the world we should have had decades ago. Polite applause broke out, but the emotion in the room ran deeper than clapping could express. She glanced back at the photo of Jamal. When the system tries to block the runway, our job isn't to turn back. It's to build another takeoff strip, one wide enough for everyone. In the front row, Jamal watched, not hidden, not in the background. He was there suited, invited, and seated beside the very captains and executives who now wanted to learn from him. A reporter asked from the crowd, Captain Carter, what inspired this specific change? Maya answered without hesitation. Humiliation did. Then, dignity followed. And my son's silence. His restraint spoke louder than outrage ever could. The screen behind her dimmed, then lit up again with 5 words, this is just the beginning. And it was not just for Jamal, But for every kid sitting at home wondering if someone like them could ever fly, the classroom wasn't very big. Just 2 rows of fold-out chairs, a whiteboard, and a screen, playing loops of training footage, jets taking off cockpits, lit like starships, engineers in neon vests, guiding giants of steel. But to the dozen teenagers seated there, it might as well have been NASA. Their eyes followed every clip, every diagram. Most of them had never even been inside an airport. And now they were here, part of the first cohort of New Horizon futures. At the front of the room stood Jamal. No blazer, this time just a Navy flight school, polo black jeans and confidence. Not the kind that puffed his chest, but the kind that sat quietly in his spine. He looked over the faces staring back at him. Some were wide-eyed, some skeptical. One kid no older than 14 sat with his arms folded, trying not to look impressed. Jamal smiled. "I'm not going to give you a speech," he began. "I'm not here to wow you with big words or tell you you can do anything." The room shifted. A few kids blinked, confused. Jamal leaned on the desk behind him. "I'm just here to tell you one thing," he said. "They're going to look at you like you don't belong, like you're pretending, like this seat should have gone to someone else." He paused. "I've sat in that seat. I've heard those voices. I've had grown men with titles try to rip my badge off my chest because they couldn't imagine I earned it." Silence. "But here's the truth," he said, his voice lowering. "You don't have to prove your dream to people who've never had to defend theirs." A ripple of understanding crossed the room. "And one more thing," he added. "The cockpit doesn't care what you look like. It only listens to your hands, your mind, your calm." He walked over to the youngest kid in the room, the one still pretending not to care, and gently placed a paper model of an aircraft on his desk. "You thinking about flying?" he asked. The boy shrugged. Jamal grinned. "That's how I started too." Then he stepped back and faced them all. "You're not guests here, you're not exceptions, you're the future. And this time we're building the runway, right?" The room stayed quiet, but not because they were bored, because they were beginning to believe it was late. The day had ended. The final vent wrapped the guests gone home, but the lights in Maya Carter's home office still glowed. Jamal stood at the doorway holding a mug of tea he barely touched. His mother sat behind the desk, not in uniform, not in heels, just barefoot, legs tucked under her laptop closed. He stepped in quietly. "You always stay up this late?" he asked. She looked up with a tired smile. "Only on days I'm proud." He walked over, set the mug on her desk, and leaned against the window. Outside city lights twinkled like ground stars. He spoke softly. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." That day he began. "When I called you from the airport, you didn't sound surprised, angry." "Yes, but not surprised." Why? Maya exhaled, then gestured to the chair across from her. He sat. "I wasn't surprised," she said, "because I've lived it too." Jamal's brows furrowed. "I don't just mean growing up poor or being the only black girl in my flight class," she said. "I mean being told I didn't belong." Explicitly, repeatedly. She reached into a drawer and pulled out an old photo herself. Barely 22, standing in front of a twin-prop training aircraft holding a helmet, too big for her head. "You see that smile?" she said. "That was after a supervisor told me I flew surprisingly well for a black girl." Jamal frowned. "I kept flying anyway," she said, "because I knew one day someone else would need to see me do it." Her voice grew softer. "You think I fought for that badge on your chest just for you to wear it? I fought for it so you'd never have to question if you deserved it." Jamal's eyes glistened. He didn't wipe them, he just let them stay. Sometimes, he whispered, "I wish you hadn't needed to fight so hard." Maya leaned forward, and sometimes she replied, "I wish I hadn't either." A pause, "But I don't regret it," she added, "because now you're flying. Not despite who you are, but because of it." Jamal looked at her, really looked, and realized she hadn't just cleared a path for him. She had held open the sky. Maya leaned back in her chair, fingers resting lightly on the edge of the photo. For a moment, her eyes weren't in the room. They were somewhere 30 years behind her on a tarmac under a southern sun, surrounded by voices that didn't know how to pronounce her name without a sneer. "You know," she began, her voice steady, "on my second week of flight school, someone replaced my headset with one that didn't work." Jamal sat up straighter. "Seriously?" She nodded. "It was a test flight, high crosswinds." My instructor kept barking instructions. I couldn't hear a word. I tried to gesture to respond, but all he saw was silence. "What happened?" "We landed hard." Not dangerous, but enough to scare him. He wrote me up for being unresponsive and reckless. I found out about the sabotage a week later. Someone bragged about it in the locker room. Jamal clenched his jaw. What did you do? I went to the supervisor, she said. He shrugged. Said, well, now you know to double check your gear like everyone else. Like it was a lesson. Like I should thank them for the yabas. Jamal shook his head. That's disgusting. Maya met his eyes. I didn't quit, she said. I showed up earlier. I checked every screw, every wire I read, every system, manual, cover to cover. And by the end of the program, guess who scored top of the class? He didn't have to ask, but it wasn't just about flying well, she said. It was about surviving a system that wasn't built for people like me to win. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk. They didn't hand me respect, Jamal. I took it day by day, hour by hour, flight by flight, until even the ones who hated me couldn't deny me. He sat silently, absorbing every word. Then Maya smiled. That's why when you called me, I didn't panic because I knew you weren't breaking. You were becoming. Weeks later, they stood side by side on a sunlit runway. The wind tugged gently at their jackets. In the distance, a small group of youth, the newest cohort, gathered around an aircraft buzzing with laughter and nervous anticipation. Maya crossed her arms, watching them. Jamal stood beside her, hands in his pockets, eyes thoughtful. Remember when I was afraid to even sit in that jump seat, he asked. Maya smirked. Now you're mentoring the next pilot who'll sit there, he looked at her. Do you think it'll ever stop, he asked. The assumptions, the stares, the judgment. She paused, then answered quietly. No, not all of it, but that was never the goal. He frowned. Then what was? She turned to him. To make sure the kids who come after you never think they imagined it, that it wasn't just in their heads, that what happened to you mattered because you mattered. He nodded slowly, then added, and to make sure the system knows we're not asking anymore. Maya smiled, not the public smile she used in boardrooms, a real one. You used to look at planes like they were magic, she said. They still are, he whispered. But now I know I'm part of the magic. They stood in silence for a beat. Then Maya stepped forward and addressed the students waiting by the aircraft. No microphone, no script, just her voice clear, strong and grounded in everything she had lived. To everyone who's ever been told you don't belong here, don't shrink, don't wait for permission, be undeniable. She turned to Jamal, who took one step forward, and together they spoke the final words. We're not changing the skies, we're changing who gets to rise in them. The engines roared to life in the background. And just like that, the future took off.